Section 7, Creating a Multiplayer Online Game. So in this section, we are going to be learning how to get started with the Network Manager, modifying for multiplayer, then creating a custom Network Manager for character select within our game, and then finally fixing up our custom Network Manager and then testing our game online. Getting started with the Network Manager. So in this video, we will cover the Unity Network Manager and Network HUD, or HUD, Network Identity, Network Transform, registering prefabs with the Network Manager, and then finally Network Behavior and Network Behavior methods. When creating a game that will have online gameplay, there will be different concepts to think about, may differ from regular Unity game development. Instead of inheriting from Mono Behavior, we will be having our scripts inherit from the Network Behavior class. Concepts that we have gone through over, such as player movement and shooting, will require a different implementation this time. Since we are technically working with a server and having more than one computer connected to our host, we will need to make sure that these concepts can work across all computers connected. Here we will take a look at the command attribute as well as such things like network identities. So in my Unity editor right now, I actually have gone ahead and created a scene. In my scene, it's pretty basic. I have a player, and underneath the player is a bullet spawn where we're going to have a bullet spawn out of, and I also have a head gun, which is basically going to be the player's gun. The main camera is set up here, so we're just going to have a full view of the scene, and pretty much our player is going to be right here in the middle, and what we're going to have is a bunch of zombies just being spawned out. And I have a zombie prefab right over here, so we're going to be instantiating the zombie prefab a little bit later on. And then in my scene, it's pretty simple. I just have a plane over here and just a couple of boxes here for decoration. As of right now, I am just getting the horizontal and the vertical axes of the player, and this is how basically I'm doing the transform. So if we open up our script and take a look, you can see that right now I'm just getting different axes to the player. And if you want to grab those, you can go ahead and just go into edit and then project settings and then input, and then just look at how you have your setup and then just assign the proper hotkeys to them. So this is my setup right now. We have gone over this before, so I just wanted to do a quick little review on that. So just one little note here about my player controller is that unlike before with our last 3D game, this one here will actually have the player moving through the blocks and pretty much the different objects I've set up in the scene right here. This is perfectly fine. I just want to really go over how to create a server in our scene right now. So pretty much let's get started with that. So in order to get a server going, we have to utilize something in Unity known as network managing. So in order to get started with this, we first have to create our network manager. So go into your scene and let's create an empty game object, and let's name this network manager. So what we need on our network manager is just a couple of components. So we need the built-in network manager. So just go ahead and attach that. And then we also need the network manager HUD, the network manager HUD. So that means that whenever we start up our game, we're going to have a menu that's basically just telling us if we want to connect as a host or connect as a client. So let's just leave this right now. This is pretty much a good start. And what we are going to focus on right now is pretty much our player. So getting a player to basically come into our scene and move around is going to be a lot different than how we normally do it. The reason is because we're going to have a bunch of different people connected to our scene, and we basically want to have our player updating and moving and basically all this other stuff happening continuously across all different servers. So in order to do this, what we need to do is we need to go into our script and we need to change a couple of things around. Type in the using Unity networking namespace. So it's using Unity engine.networking. And just erase my little error right there. So now we should actually be wanting to inherit now from the network behavior class. So let's delete mono behavior and type in network behavior. Okay, so now we are inheriting from network behavior. So now what we need to do is we need to change up a couple of things here in our script. So what we need to do firstly is, and I just actually noticed the reason why I'm getting those errors is because I actually overwrote the Unity engine. So just put that back in and we should be fine. Okay. So we have the Unity networking namespace, and we are now inheriting from network behavior from the class. So in order to change a couple of things around here, we need to actually identify the local player of the whichever player is firstly connected to as the host, or as we like to call here, the local player. So we need to add in a check that's going to check for the local player process first. After adding this check, then we will add a component such as network transform to the player prefab, and then the network transform will synchronize the game objects across all the networks. So this basically will allow for the local player to only move the local player game object. So first, let's do a little bit of coding here. We'll type out if drop down, and then is not is local player, and then we'll just return. So now that we have that down, go back into your editor, and now we have to do a couple of things to our player prefab. So firstly, what we have to do is we have to add something called a network transform. So add the network transform, and what we want to do is you can adjust the send right now. I actually am perfectly fine with it being at 9. This basically will increase the amount of speed that the player can actually move across all the servers. 9 is a pretty good setting, so you don't have to move it if you do not want to. But one thing that to make note of is that for the network identity, you want to check off local player authority. So then this will basically give the local player, the different host, basically complete control over their player. So for all different hosts, then they have complete control over their local player. So go back into your script, and now we are going to do add a little bit more code. So we're going to go over something here called a command attribute. So we have a shooting script right here. However, the bullet is also an object that needs to be transitioned over the server over a given amount of time. So we're actually going to need to eventually put on another network identity. But what we are going to do first is we're going to go over something called the command attribute. So the command attribute, which looks like this, and you can just basically close it off like that. And so the command attribute basically indicates that the following function, which is going to be our shoot method right over here, is going to be called by the client, but will run on the server. The command also allows for any arguments in the function to be passed to the server. So commands are only set from the local player object. When making a command, the function must be named to start with CMD. So right now we have our command attribute over our shoot method or function. So what we're going to do now is just type in CMD for the method. And now what we need to do is just change this up here in our update function and just add CMD. So right now this actually will not exactly work so well. And the reason is because we need to actually spawn the bullet across all the clients that are connected to the server. So if we were to actually run this right now, it would actually not work at all because the bullet is not going to be spawned. So what we need to do is go in here and then just type in network server dot spawn and then type in bullet clone. So we want to basically spawn the bullet over all the different servers and just build it out, make sure that it's working okay, and we should be okay with this so far. So let's go back into our scene, and we have to make a couple of changes here. So the first thing is let's go on to the prefab, and we need to get our bullet prefab. So on our bullet prefab, we need to add a couple of components again. We need to add the network transform, and this automatically puts in our network identity. So what we want to do is just lower the send rate down to 0. We actually don't need it to be at 9 right now. The bullet should be transversing across the scene perfectly fine. And you don't need to select anything here underneath network identity, so just leave that alone. So the next thing that we need to do is let's take a look here at our network manager. So our network manager is pretty much going to handle loading different prefabs into our scene. So our player prefab is basically going to be what our players that connect to the server are going to look like. So what we can go ahead and do is let's just apply all the changes here to our player prefab and make sure that those changes took place, which they did. So now we should be ready to just go over here and delete this from our scene. Next, go over to the player prefab and then just drag and drop your player into the scene. Make sure that it's inside of the player prefab, sorry, not into the scene, but sure that you put it in underneath the spawn info tab, and make sure that it's in the player prefab member variable right over here. The next thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that it's going to instantiate the bullets. And in order to do that, you need to grab your bullet and then drag it over and then put it into this registered spawnable prefab section right here, and just make sure that you have one of them available. So go ahead and save your scene, And what we need to do now is we need to have two instances of our game running. So in order to do this, you're going to have to make a build of your game. So go in here and you could do build and run, and this will automatically build out your game and then run it for you. And then as soon as it finishes building out, it should automatically run your game. So right now we have our windowed option, so let's select that. And now as soon as our game starts up, we should be brought here, and now you have the network HUD right over here. So now we can actually still play the game within the editor. So now what we want to do is we want to connect one as a host. So here is my local player, and let me get up the build, and I'm going to connect as a client on the build. So now as you can see, I'm actually moving around right now. And over here too, I can also move around. It's a little bit difficult now though to see which player is which, and also I need to fix up something here with the sending rate as well, because right now our players are not being updated across the scene. So let's go back and take a little look, but first let's actually identify our local player so then things will become a little bit easier to look at. So jump back into your script, let's go create another method here, and this is going to be a public override void on start local player. So this is actually a specific method that's exclusive to network behavior. So what you want to do is on start local player will actually reference what player is connected to the server and which one is the local player, the one that's basically the host. So what we want to do is, but the player that's whoever is exclusive to the computer. So pretty much the person that connected to the computer as a client or a host, basically their player. So it's whatever object was assigned to you. That is pretty much your character in a sense. So you want to be able to distinguish which character is yours from others. So what we want to do is we want to get the component mesh renderer, and what we are going to do is we're going to set the color of the local player, meaning your player you connected with, to blue. So now we're going to set material.color equals color.blue. So now when you connect, and I know that the game is still technically not perfect right now, but be sure that you build it out and just start to play it, and then also connect here within the editor as well. Then when you start up as a host, now your character should be blue. Now connect with the other one, and now you can actually see the green character right over here. This one here is yours though, and now I think that you can probably tell the difference. Okay, great. So now let's figure out how we can fix up this little issue here with the movement not being updated across the scene. And now I see what the issue was. So underneath transform sync model, we actually have it to sync the rigid body 3D when actually we want to sync the transform. So this is actually a common error that some of you might actually experience because it's always automatically set to syncing the rigid body. So make sure that you sync the transform, and also make sure that in the bullet's case that the bullet is actually set to synchronize the rigid body 3D. But we do want to have the player's transform synchronized, so make sure that that setting is indeed selected. Okay, so now let's try building out again. Okay, now just get your build up, start it in the editor, connect as a host, and then over here connect as a client. Alright, so for some reason my game got a little bit stuck there for a second, so I just had to rebuild the scene a bit. But if you look right now, I'm actually connected over here as a client, so it's a bit slower on my client side, but the bullets are actually being instantiated and also flying. If you go over here and compare it, you can actually see me, yep, see, right over here. So the movement is actually being applied across both servers. and I can move back and forth, and then also over here I can move around and also shoot. I can also go over here and also shoot as well. Okay, great. So now we have our player movement on a server. So this was a pretty good start.